Welcome back to a new episode where we will be talking about classes and IDs in HTML and CSS. Classes and IDs helps us to target a specific HTML element inside our page. And in the previous episodes, we created basic elements such as h1, h2, h3 and a paragraph. But using these elements alone will usually do the job. But these tags without attributes do not cover every possible type of page element of layout choice. The problem with only using the h1 opening and closing tag and styling it right in our CSS is that every h2 element that we will create will have the same styling, and usually that's not what we want. So let's copy paste our h2 and let's go back to our styling and let's style our h2 and let's say color is equal to blue. If we save it and refresh the browser, we need to save our index as well. Refresh it. The color of both elements are blue. If we want an element to have a specific styling, we should use the element name inside our CSS. But what if we want to target one specific element out of the multiple h2 tags or paragraph tags that you can create? What we can do in order for this to work is to add an ID or class to one of these elements. But before I do that, let me create a comment at the bottom, because in this episode I want to add some comments about the most important stuff that I will say, since working with classes and IDs is, pretty important. So there are a couple differences between classes and IDs. First off, I want to start off with IDs. Inside the h2 element that we have, we need to create a new attribute with the name ID. So right after the 2, let's hit space, write down ID, we need to set it equal to double quotes. And inside the double quotes, we need to give our h2 a name. And what eventually our goal is to use the name that we're putting in between the quotes to style it inside our CSS. But before we continue on, let me talk a little bit more about how you should use IDs. So an ID is a unique identifier, which means that each element can have only one ID. So you cannot add another attribute ID with a different name. Each element can have only one ID. And what I mean with this is that you cannot add the same ID name to, let's say the second header. It will actually work, but the problem is that your code will not pass validation if you use the same ID on more than one element. So let me add that as a comment as well, that each page can have only one element with that specific ID. Let's give our ID a name. So let's say my header, save it, refresh it, and you can see that nothing's happening because we need to style it. So let's go to our style sheet and let's remove our h2 styling. And the way you style an Id selector is writing down hashtag followed by the ID name that we gave right inside of our attribute. So my header, followed by a set of curly brackets. With using the hashtag, we're basically saying to our CSS that we're referring to an ID inside our index.html. Also, if you take a look at the color, because my header just turned blue, and if you go to our index.html, you can see that ID is blue as well. What we want to do for our styling is to style the color to green. So let's save it, refresh the browser, and you can see that the first header has a color of green. What we can do now is to add a padding. So let's say 20 pixels, save it, refresh it, and you can see that the styling is only appearing on the first one because we're only styling my header. Now if we go back to our index.html, I want to focus on classes. And a fun thing about classes is that you can use the same class on multiple elements. So let me add it as a comment as well. Classes. You can use the same class on multiple elements. Typing and talking is pretty difficult, so excuse me if some of these parts takes a little bit longer. So right now, we don't need our second H2, so let's remove it. Let's create a paragraph tag with "this is my paragraph" in between. The way you create a class is pretty much the same as what you do with an ID, but instead of writing ID, we need to write down class. And we also need to set it equal to a set of double quotes. We also need to give it a name, and the name that I want to give it is my paragraph. And what we can do is copy and paste our paragraph tag, well, 3 times. Save it. And we do not need to replace our class name because you can have multiple tags with the same class. What I want to do is to go to my style sheet, and right below my header, we need to style our class. And the way you style a class is by writing down a punctuation mark followed with the class name. And in our case, it's my paragraph, followed by a space and a set of curly brackets. And just like the ID, you can see that the color is the same as the attribute in the element. And the styling works pretty much the same. So let's add some styling. So let's say that the color is equal to 666,666. The font size is 20 pixels. We have a margin of 0. And we want to text align everything in the center. So let's save it. Refresh the browser. And you can see that the styling has applied to all the paragraph tags, and our code will actually pass the validation because we can use our class name on multiple elements. And that's what we're doing, because we have a my paragraph class that we're using on a total of 3 paragraphs. We can also use our class, well, on our H2. So let's copy it and let's remove the ID. Let's save it. Refresh the browser. And you can see that the styling appeared on the header as well, because like I said, we can use it on multiple elements. Another fun thing that you can do with classes is to add more than one class. So let's go back to our code editor and let's go back to the ID for our H2. What we want to do is to make the middle paragraph tag bold. And the way you do that is to go right after the first class name. We need to hit space and write down the second class name. And since I want to make it more bold, and since I want to make the second one bigger, let's write down big. Let's save it. Go back to our style sheet, and right below my paragraph, we can write down punctuation mark big, set of curly brackets, and let's say the font weight needs to be equal to bold. So let's save it, refresh the browser, and you can see that, well, even though we're using big as a class name, we're also using my paragraph. So the middle paragraph take all the styling from my paragraph and it will add more styling to it. So it will take the styling of big as well. This was it for this episode. But before I end the video, I want to sum up the biggest differences, since it is, well, pretty essential to know the differences. I recommend you to use the ID attribute when you have a single element on the page that will take the style, because the ID is unique. I recommend you to use a class when you want to consistently style multiple elements throughout the page. A good way to remember this is that a class is a type of item and the ID is the unique name of an item. In the next episode, I want to talk about how to use all font properties in CSS. If you do enjoy my content and you want to see more, leave this video a thumbs up, and if you're new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button.